Got it.
Okay.
Okay, now we're recording. Good. All right. I'm going to go ahead and get started now. I'll share my screen and go from there. All right, so today we're going to use a different CAD program from now on. So we've abandoned AutoCAD. Yay. I found a good resource that is cloud-based, so you can access it as long as you can get on a web browser. It runs on a web browser. So it's not anything that you have to install. You just go to the website, you log in, and then you can use their software. So it's called Onshape, and I gave you the link in the Google Classroom. So the first thing you want to do is click on that link, and you'll go to a sign up page. This is for education, and this is free. You'll fill in your information here, select that you are a student, of course, and school level, we're going to be grade school. There's, this is your personal information. The next step, I think, is creating like a password. And then step number 3 is it will send you an email, and then you'll need to click on that to activate your account. So go ahead and go through those steps. Does everybody know how to minimize the zoom so you can do your own thing? Okay, good. Once you've created your account, check your email and just wait for them to send you the verification email.
ccsgoshen.org or ccs.goshen.org.
So ccsgoshen.org. That's our domain if it's asking for the domain name for the school. ccsgoshen.org. That's very important because that's how they verify you are a student.
Is it the first one?
Do they need to know that? What am I?
Yep. I'm not a robot. Yeah.
Whoa.
What shall I say that I'm using this Onshape for?
What are the options?
It doesn't say. It's just like a place where I can write a sentence or something.
You're in CAD 3D printing class.
Okay, thank you.
I just put for school purposes.
Yeah, education.
All right.
I am not a robot.
Are you sure?
That sounds like something a robot would say.
Goshen, Indiana.
I might flip my
Doesn't.
right there.
Oh,
On left hand. I I did. Password. Oh boy. It's pretty hard. Password.
When you get to the email, it might take you to a link like this where you sign in, or it might automatically just sign you in. But if you see a page like this, you're going to enter in your email address and then your password.
Welcome to Onshape.
No.
Did we watch the video?
No.
Are you actually in the program, or is it the website?
I went to the website and then I signed in and then, or I created my password and then I signed in and then this box came up saying, welcome to Onshape, and the video.
What is this whole set your default units?
So we're going to go over that in a second.
All right.
Oh, wow.
Is this the screen that most of you are seeing? Something similar to this?
No. Yes. So mine is set your default.
Same.
Okay, you can get out of that screen.
Oh,
How many of you need more time? Anybody? Connor, you good? Jedrick, since I can't see your face, can you give me a thumbs up or unmute and say you're good?
I'm good so far.
Awesome. All right, so this program is called Onshape, obviously, and it was developed by some of the CEOs from SolidWorks. And SolidWorks is one of the top two names, obviously. Autodesk, AutoCAD is the other of the two, I would say, big names in the CAD industry. And SolidWorks is actually one of the programs that is used locally in a lot of the factories around here for designing parts and components for RVs and all that good stuff. So I'm actually really excited to get to learn this program. It is vastly different than the CAD programs I've used in the past. So I'm kind of starting from scratch. So I apologize, I don't have all the answers, but I promise you as I continue learning, I will hopefully be ahead of you enough to answer your questions. Today is going to be an introduction, and we're going to start modeling in 2 dimensions first before we get into 3 dimensions. And the first thing we want to do is kind of do some changes to our settings, and then I want to show you where you find those settings first of all, and then we'll get started in drawing some stuff hopefully soon. So where you see your name in the upper right hand corner, go ahead and click there, and then you're going to go to My Account. This is where you're going to find your preferences, also all of your personal information. So preferences, this is where you would change what they were talking about before, are units. So in class, we will normally use millimeters, even though we are in America and we usually talk in feet and inches. As far as 3D printing, millimeters is probably the standard measurement. So it's easier, since we're going to be printing with millimeters, to just start modeling in millimeters. If you were working at a factory that dealt with standard US parts, you would probably want to use feet and inches. But millimeters is so much easier to work with just because everything's divided by 10. The decimal length doesn't really matter. This is just however many decimals you want your measurements to be displayed in. Then angle units, we're going to keep in degrees. Mass units, we'll keep in American pounds. And time format doesn't really matter. So the only thing we really changed was the units to millimeters. And then in the mouse controls, I set mine to AutoCAD because that's what I'm used to using. And I would recommend the same for you. And there it shows you rotate in this program is the same as orbit. So just as a reminder, to access the orbit, you hold the shift key down and then you click the click wheel, so the middle mouse button, to orbit in this program. And then everything else is pretty good. Panning is the middle mouse button. That means that's the hand tool, so you can grab your workspace and move it around. And then zooming is the wheel, zooming, rolling forward is zooming in, rolling backward is zooming out with the scroll wheel. So if you don't have a mouse at home, I would encourage you to get one first of all, everyone get one that you can have. But today, since we're just doing two-dimensional things, I don't think you'll need it that much. Hopefully you'll be able to navigate the workspace. So with that, it's pretty much, as you scroll through, there's a lot of different settings that right now don't mean anything because we really don't know what to do with these buttons. So for now, we're just going to leave it at this and go back to the Onshape program by clicking in the upper left-hand corner. All right, so in this program, there's a pretty good library of tutorials. Some of them you have to pay for. Obviously, you probably wouldn't want to do that, but you'll access those in the Learning Center. So we're going to go there now because we're going to use a lot of these resources today to get started. So the Learning Center opens up a new tab. So you still have your Onshape program open in the other tab, and then you have this other tab that you can use for tutorials. And we're going to go to the self-paced section. And we're going to just click on all self-paced courses. And we're going to go to the Introduction to Sketching, which is the one lesson I've completed. So again, I'll just go back if you happen to miss those steps. So from here, you're going to the self-paced. And then going to the all self-paced courses. And then clicking on Introduction to Sketching. So here you'll find there's a lot of videos that explain each and every one of these things that we're going to go over in class today. So if you happen to forget something and you need to go back and get a refresher, you can go through this course again. But the videos are very short, like a minute each. They don't really give you a lot of time to absorb the information. So today we're going to kind of go step by step and actually do some drawing while we go through the lessons. So I'm going to skip a lot of these videos because a lot of them are pretty elementary. So we'll get started with our drawings, but kind of leave this tab open because we'll need a couple of the videos later on. And we're going to start by starting a sketch. So in a new document, at the create button, click that, and then scroll over document, and then click on it to create a new document. I'm just going to name this one Introduction. So here we're in a CAD design world. That looks very different. So there's a lot of buttons up here, pretty simplified in comparison to AutoCAD. There's much fewer buttons, and the workspace looks very different. There's no grid, and you can see instead of a UCS that has different arrows, you actually see different planes for what they call top, which would be kind of the floor view. Then you have a front and a right. So these are the main planes that you would draw on in your CAD drawing. So we're going to focus on the top plane. And to get started, you have to determine what you want to do first. You want to have a sketch. So sketch is a two-dimensional drawing. And so everything starts in 2 dimensions. So we need to have a sketch. So the sketch button is at the top in the upper left-hand corner there. It's the first tool or button that you can press. And the first thing that you need to do is designate a sketch plane. What surface do you want to draw on? So we're going to choose the top plane. And it should give you kind of a window that's a little bit bigger than that smaller square. So you've selected that plane. Now you can actually start drawing, but we want to make this a little bit easier by kind of zooming into that and making it flat on our screen. So if you don't have a mouse, the easiest way to do that, actually even with a mouse, is to right click and then view normal to sketch plane. So this is kind of our flat drawing surface to draw on. Since we're focused on two-dimensional sketching today, you really won't need to orbit or see anything from the side. It's all just going to be straight on like this. So the first tool we're going to learn is obviously this. You'd have a line option. So you have a line tool. So this works a lot different. And I have no idea why they designed it this way, but you click to start a line and drag away from that point. And you have a horizontal reference and you have a vertical reference. So those are kind of like snapping points. And you cannot put a measurement in before you make a line. You just have to simply make a line and then determine the length that you want it to be. So basically you're just choosing the direction you want your line to be by clicking, and then you can type in, say I wanted this to be 100 millimeters, and press enter. And it will make the line exactly 100 millimeters.
Wow.
So if you just use the line tool by itself and click again to make a line, it's going to assume that you want to continue making a connected, what would be called a polyline in AutoCAD. If you only want to make a single line, so I'm going to just escape out of that. If I wanted to make a single line without continuing, I would click and hold the left mouse button and drag out. The same thing, when I release, it creates a line and I can put the measurement in. and it won't continue on. So that was like just a single line. So if you're just drawing a single line, you would click and hold and drag away. If you want multiple lines, you'll click, determine the length, or click again, and then determine the length you want, 75, and continue on if I wanted to make a square. 75. So that's a little bit different from AutoCAD in a lot of ways. You don't click and then determine the length. You click and then just basically any length will do. You just click any random spot and then you put the length in after the fact. The other thing that's kind of neat is everything that you draw has a dimension attached to it. So it automatically adds dimensions to your drawing. And you can change the length just by clicking inside that value and changing the value. So instead of 75, if I want 100, so it stretches the line out. So that's how you would change the length or any kind of variable on your drawing, would be to click in the dimensioning information and change it. So as I'm doing this, just kind of play around in the space, get used to using each of the tools. It's going to, be a mess, but that's all right. We're just playing around. So that's the line tool. So pretty simple. Any questions about that so far?
How do you show your lines, how long the segments are?
Okay, so if you can't find the line tool, you have to be in a sketch. I'm just answering some of the questions in the chat. So in the sketch, once you're done with the sketch, say I was done with this, I press a check mark, and then it goes to a different set of tools. These are more 3D modeling tools. So to find the sketch tools, you have to be inside the sketch. So to get inside a sketch, you just double click, and then the lines become kind of this bluish color. And your tools should change to drawing tools instead of three-dimensional modeling tools. All right. Sorry, I'm getting distracted by a lot of notifications I'm getting on my phone. Hopefully none of these are important.
Either I focus on this or I focus on that. I can't go back.
How do you make the segments
I don't even know.
define the length?
So if you have a line like this one here,
Mm-hmm. Yep.
so if it didn't have a dimension on it, you can add a dimension. This is the dimension tool here. So you click on that and then click on the line and drag out a dimension. So if you didn't set the dimension, it won't have the dimensions there. Oh, what am I doing here? That was the distance setting. I didn't want that. So if you don't set a dimension when you're drawing, it won't display a specific dimension. You can go in and add it afterwards. And this one is dependent. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. This the length of this line is dependent on this point here because it's attached to this point. So if I change this line, it's going to change this line. So I'm going to add just a dimension so you can see that. So I change this to 125. It changed the dimension of that. So this dimension is dependent on the placement of this line. So if any of these dimensions change, it's automatically going to change this dependent dimension here. So we'll go over that in a little bit, how to make things attached. So that's a line that's pretty easy. So we're going to go ahead and get rid of all of this. So if you're in a tool like the line tool or anything else, you'll press the escape key just to make sure that you're not in a specific tool. And then you can select everything and then just delete it. So the next thing we're going to learn is the rectangle. So there's two options for a rectangle. One is a corner rectangle and the other one is center point rectangle. So normally in AutoCAD, you draw a rectangle from the corners. So you click in one spot and drag away if you want to draw up and to the right or up and to the left or down and to the left or down and to the right. You're determining basically the direction you want to draw the rectangle, but you're not really setting any dimensions. Like you can get close if you want to. Let's say I wanted to do a 200 by 100 millimeter rectangle. So I'm just going to click here, and then I'm going to type the first dimension, which was 200, enter, then it automatically shifts to the next dimension, and I will type in 100, press enter. So it's a little bit opposite of what we're used to, where we normally would put the dimensions in as we draw. Here you just kind of randomly draw a rectangle and then you put the dimensions in after you place it. Let's say I wanted to make a 50 by 25. So go ahead and make a few rectangles just to practice how to make them. The other option to make a rectangle is from the center out. So if you click the arrow next to the rectangle, you can choose center point rectangle. And this one, you would be making a rectangle determining the center point. And the same thing, you would just click at an approximate point, the way you want to orient your rectangle, and then you would type in the dimensions.
Make a box that's 75 by 8. I need to put in both of those numbers. Or if you put in the one that you transfer.
So when you're drawing, the first dimension is always the horizontal dimension or the X value. And then the second value after you press enter would be the Y axis value. So I'll go ahead and make one more just to show you again. So if I wanted to make a tall and squatty, tall and thin rectangle, right now it's close to 40 by 200, so I'll just go ahead and make it 40. So I clicked to make my rectangle approximately the size I want it. 40, enter, and then 200. So in some of the tutorials that I've watched, the first step in sketching is actually just sketching. It's a rough estimate of the shape that you're going to be making. Then you go in and make the dimensions exactly what you want them to be. It's kind of odd the way that works, but it's just different. All right, so I'll keep the rectangles on here. We'll just go to the next tool, which is the circle tool. And for the most part, we'll use the center point circle, which again just determines the center point of the circle. So I'm just going to click in a random spot. And then again, you just click at an approximate value that you want it to be, and then type in exactly what you want the diameter to be. So anytime you see that 0 symbol with a slash through it, that's a symbol for diameter. So the diameter of the circle is 50. So go ahead and try another one. I'm going to attach this one to this rectangle. And let's do 100. Pretty simple. The next one in that set of tools is the 3-point circle. This is where you would want a circle to intersect 3 different points. So I'm going to choose just 3 random points in my drawing. So that circle perfectly intersects those 3 points. Now I would recommend, I might send an email, but there's not a 2-point circle option, which is another popular thing that we used to use in CAD. So let's say I wanted to put a circle right in between these 2 points. There's not that option for a 2-point. There's only a 3-point, which I don't understand why, but there's probably a reason that I'll learn later. So to do a 2-point circle, you can't. So if I wanted to circle exactly in between these 2 points on this rectangle, I would have to do a center point circle and then click on the midpoint of the line and go out to the outside radius instead of going from point to point. And then the other one is an ellipse. So this would be not a perfect circle, but an oblong circle. So this operates similar to a center rectangle, where you're determining the X value and then the Y value. So actually it's opposite of that. Let's see. So 300 by 100. I'm going to leave this drawing here because it's interesting to use this for the next part, which is the arcs. So there's 4 different ways to make an arc, and the conic part I didn't even see in the tutorial. So we'll start with the 3-point arc. And this one is you determine 2 points. So I'm just going to click on 2 random points. So it's like a line to begin with. And then you determine the radius of your arc. type in a specific one if you wanted to, 50. Then the other one is tangent arc, which means one of the edges or one of the starting point is going to start tangent to another object. So I'll go tangent to this circle. Oh, I have to use a point, I think. So arcs were a little bit confusing. I was going through the tutorials, and the center point arc is a little bit weird because you determine the center point of your imaginary circle first, and then you determine the arc points. So go ahead and play around with the arcs a little bit. The next tool is the Polygon tool. And there's two ways to draw a polygon. One is inscribed and the other is circumscribed. So as we draw them, this will make sense. So let's start with inscribed polygon first. So this is a lot like the circle tool. You have a center point for your polygon, and then you determine how large you want it to be. And then the next thing you determine is, so you've clicked to determine your center point, click again to determine the size. And then the next thing you want to do is determine how many sides your polygon has. So I'm just scrolling so you scroll your mouse up and to the right, it increases the number of sides. If you go down and to the left, it should decrease the number of sides. So I think you have a maximum of 50 sides or 50 some. Can't remember how many. I think it determines or depends on how large. Yeah, 50 sides is the maximum. And the minimum is 3.
When you zoom in, it looks, you would see it's actually like lines.
Yeah, if you zoom in, it's actually facets. So I'm going to make a triangle that has 3 sides. And since I didn't determine specifically what the size was, I'm going to add a dimension to it. So this is called inscribed, and you can see there's a circle on the inside. That's why it's called inscribed, because the circle is on the inside. The other version of the same tool is circumscribed.
Gone beyond the system level.
So I'm going to try that next. And I'll make this a octagon. Let's see, 8 sides. So this is circumscribed, which means it's the circle is on the outside rather than on the inside. So this is inscribed versus circumscribed. All right, so far, those are all the drawing tools that I've learned. And so in our instruction, we just went through lines and rectangles, circles and arcs. Oh, we haven't gone through construction geometry slots. Let's do that. Construction geometry is just like this circle. The circles that you see in your polygons are construction geometry. They're just guidelines. They're not actually part of your sketch. So if you ever want a guideline that doesn't really matter, you're going to be using a construction geometry. So I'm going to use construction geometry to create two lines. So the first thing you want to do is choose the tool that you want to use, and then switch to construction geometry by clicking on this button. Now when you draw a line, it's kind of like a dotted line. So I'm going to use a couple of these. Let's make an arc in construction geometry. I got it on a weird setting. We'll do a 3-point arc.
FYI, I think class
Class is
or
over.
wait, maybe you guys have a. I'm sorry.
No,
I'm sorry. Yeah, you're right.
Don't
I
lie
mean, it
to
might
her.
be like break time, but
We don't know what our class
Yeah.
schedule is.
9-minute break.
Is it on the
No.
line?
9-minute break was before this class.
Oh, was it?
9-minute
You're
break
right.
was after chapel.
You're right. 10:25.
Yeah.
I'm off an hour. Sorry.
That's all right. It is kind of time for a break. So let's do a stretch break and be back by 11:30.
Is that your schedule on the web?
It should be, yeah. Here's a
I'm
copy if
pretty
you
sure
didn't
that's
see
the
it.
slide that you're sitting too long. I broke it.
Yeah, sorry. It's times to even change. Right.
Yeah.
Put the new schedule back. in my
I didn't know, I just was given a copy this morning. In fact, this class. So this was like the basic introduction class.
yeah.
But
No,
we
it's,
had it in here since there was only like 5 students.
no, it's my fault. I had the last week, the second half of the clock.
Oh, okay, so then it is quite great, yeah.
I gotta go
For
for
your
that.
class.
Gotcha.
Just wondering if this is Michelle that bought the camper from Paul and Carol Hess. I was just wondering if you liked it or not for it. Just curious. Just talk to you later. Bye.
Who's that?
Oh, that's me. Sorry, I have my thing still on. Checking my messages.
Mr. Mitchell,
Yeah.
are you doing attendance for your classes?
Yes.
Okay.
Question mark. I did this class, and I'm pretty sure I did last class as well. I'm just double checking.
Okay. Okay, unless I scroll down the Zooms, I don't know who is on Zoom and who isn't.
Right. Yeah, I have been. Yeah, I did both classes so far.
Okay, great, thanks. the right thing.
I'm sure we should schedule my funeral. That's about
Like this?
Are
you headed to Herschel?
I think we are.
You do too?
Wait.
Herschel
You're
just like,
not, because
Oh wait.
you're on the front side, vector side.
Stop.
yeah, you're on the opposite side as
Um,
Herschel is to him.
Whatever. It's fine again.
So what time is lunch?
Lunch is 12.
Hey, whenever you want it.
Lunch is 12:20 to 12:50 today.
So in an hour and 20 minutes, we're gonna get. Oh wait, 12:20.
Okay.
So actually,
It's 11:30, guys.
I think we're going to start again. So in the tutorial, we'll learn a little bit more about this construction geometry, but basically anything that you use as a guideline, you'll want to use construction geometry so it doesn't divide the surface area of your drawing. So if you're just using a guideline, you're going to use construction geometry. And you can always switch between real geometry and construction geometry by selecting a line and then toggling it from construction geometry to regular geometry. So if you ever forget and you draw the wrong kind of line, you can always go in, select the line you want to change to construction geometry, and then just click on that button. It will convert it. The next tool we're going to learn is something unique I've never seen before. It's called a slot tool. So I imagine in a lot of different industries, you make slots in things. So we're going to use the slot tool. It's found where the offset tool is. And I don't really know how to describe that symbol. It looks like a, I don't know, face with a nose on it or something. So that's the offset tool. But if you click on the arrow, you get the slot tool. And this creates a slot around a line. So I'm just going to click on this line here, and it creates a slot. So I can create a slot on both of these lines that I just created with construction geometry. And then you can change, whoops. Click on both of these again. Press enter when you're done. You can make multiple slots at the same time. Then press enter, and then you can change the radius, or that's the diameter of the slot itself by clicking on the dimension. I'm going to increase that to 50. And since I made both of these at the same time, they're actually linked together. So if I change one dimension, it's going to change both of them. And if I change the length, it will change the length of the slot. So let's say I made this smaller, 150.
He made this.
So basically what this is, it's a line that's been offset. So the offset is the distance, and then the radius is also a distance setting because the larger the radius of the circle, the larger the offset is. So it's kind of a unique tool. All right, so I'm going to go back to my notes here. So we've done construction geometry, slots, and polygons. We did that earlier. So now we're on to sketch constraints. And since this is different, I want to show the video. If I can, we'll see. And then we'll try a few of these constraints. Constraints are similar to what AutoCAD calls snaps. So a constraint would be a specific snapping point that you would use in your drawing. So let's go ahead and see if I can play this video. Let me see if I can. I might have to end this and select share my audio. Yes, share computer sound.
How big it is? Yeah. If you do that, okay.
All right, we're just going to watch this video for a couple minutes, and then we'll try to apply what we learn.
Video, we're going to discuss using constraints in Onshape. Many of the constraints you create in Onshape are created automatically. As you sketch in Onshape, inferences to other geometry will automatically appear. You can also wake any sketch geometry you want by hovering over that entity for a moment with your cursor. This will wake up the reference and makes it easy to constrain while sketching. We'll be covering inferencing in more detail as a separate topic in the future. There are two ways to show the constraints of a sketch. You can show all of the sketch constraints at once, or you can show the constraints associated with an individual piece of geometry. To show all the constraints in the sketch at once, click the Show Constraints checkbox in the sketch dialog. With this checked, you'll see constraint icons in the graphics for all the constraints you've created in that sketch. But if you don't want to see all the constraints in your sketch, you can show the constraints of an individual piece of sketch geometry by simply hovering over it with your cursor. If you move your cursor over the constraint icon, the sketch geometry associated with that constraint will highlight. A tip is you can use the Shift key to keep the constraint icons visible on the screen when moving your cursor. This can make it easier to select them. One important thing to note as you're getting started is the constraint icons are generally either blue or white. A blue constraint icon indicates a constraint that is associated with something outside of that sketch. For instance, your geometry is constrained to the origin or an edge of a previous feature. A white constraint icon indicates a constraint between entities within that sketch. As mentioned earlier, many of the constraints you create in Onshape are automatic, but there will be times when you need to add a constraint manually. To do this, simply left-click the sketch entities that you want to constrain, then click the constraint that you want in the toolbar. You can also select the constraint from the toolbar first, then click on the sketch geometry that you want to constrain. This is particularly useful if you want to add several of the same constraints, as the command remains active until you deselect it or press the escape key. We'll be discussing the various constraints and examples where you might use them in the future. One final thing to mention, you can delete a constraint by left-clicking the constraint icon in the graphics and clicking the delete key on your keyboard.
All right, very helpful and also very confusing. So hopefully I will clarify some of this as we just kind of sketch in here. So a constraint is basically a snap that is permanent unless you tell Onshape, I no longer want that constraint to be permanent. Whereas in AutoCAD, snaps are always temporary. So let's go ahead and just sketch some stuff. I'm going to go ahead and duplicate what he had on the screen by creating two circles. So let's go ahead and create a larger circle. And then we're going to create a smaller circle next to it. And then we're going to have two lines. So I'm going to go to the line tool, and it's already wanting me to use a constraint. Let's see, there we go. So just attach the lines to the circles. So we have a top line here. I'm going to create another line at the bottom somewhere. So you've already used constraints without even knowing it. These constraints here are intersecting. So this line intersects this circle and these 2 points. If I were to move the circle away, which we haven't learned how to move, but these the lines would remain connected. That's the difference between this program and AutoCAD, that those lines are all already permanently connected. So if you want to change a constraint, so right now it's just attached somewhere, it's intersecting the circle. Let's say I wanted it to be perfectly tangent, which means it intersects, it's at like a 0 angle. I don't know how to describe that. Is Austin still in there? Kaufman?
No, he's not.
Oh, he might be able to explain what tangent means. It's like right on the surface without kind of making it. Right now there's an angle here and an angle on the other side. So tangent means there's no angle on the outside. There's probably a really good way to describe that in math terms. So let's go ahead and make this connection tangent instead of just intersecting. So my screen might look a little bit different. I have actually all of the different constraints. Coincident is like intersecting. So you may have a drop menu to get the rest of these, but these are all different constraints. So I'm looking for the one that's tangent, which is the one that has a line and a circle. So I'm going to click on that, and I'm going to click on the line and the circle. It's going to make it tangent to the circle. So I clicked this first. So that means I can use this for the next line as well. So this one still is not tangent, even though it looks like it is. So now all of the lines are perfectly tangent to the circles. So that's one constraint. You have several different constraints. Another really important one is concentric. So it makes it the center. Let's see. When you're drawing circles, it automatically assumes that concentric. So if I draw a circle and then go to draw another circle, it might not be concentric. So let me draw an arc outside of a circle. And I want to make this concentric. So now the center of the arc is always going to be the center of this circle. So it's like placing dependencies in your drawing when you want things to stay connected in a certain way. It's also true for like right angles. So if I start drawing lines, you can see the screen tip, if I am perfectly vertical, there's a constraint that is vertical. And then the next constraint I see if I start drawing a right angle is that it's a right angle to this line. So it's referencing my current drawing and constraining it to a certain dependency. I think that's the best way to describe that. It's very different from AutoCAD and just simply snaps, because they always stay on. And like you said, if you want to see your constraints, you hover over a line and you can see the different constraints. So this one has two constraints. One is vertical, and the other, when I scroll over, I can see these two lines are dependent on each other at a right angle. So let's say if you wanted to change the geometry and not affect the other lines, you can always remove a dependency by selecting that, and then you can delete it. So hopefully that makes sense. At least enough sense to get started using this program. So here's a few other constraints.
So now that we've discussed using constraints, let's discuss a few of the various constraint types and where you might use them. Here we'll be discussing the coincident constraint, the horizontal and vertical constraints, and the equal constraint. We'll be covering more constraints in the future. Let's start with a coincident constraint. A coincident constraint simply brings two things together. For instance, if you want to bring the endpoints of two lines together, you can simply left-click the two endpoints, then select the coincident constraint from the toolbar. This brings the 2 points together. But you can use a coincident constraint to bring together more than just 2 points. For example, you can create a coincident constraint between a point and a plane. Here I'll create a coincident constraint between the right plane.
Okay, so even though this looks like a line, this is actually a plane. So let's say this is, you're viewing it from the front, and this is the side view plane where you have other drawings, and you want to match this plane with the other plane. So that confused me the first time I watched it. I actually had to rewind and watch it again.
And this point. It can also be a point in an arc or circle. You can even use a coincident constraint to bring together two different lines, circles or arcs. If you're a fan of keyboard shortcuts, you can use the I key for coincident. Now let's discuss the horizontal and vertical constraints. As the name implies, these constraints make the selected entity or entities either horizontal or vertical relative to the current sketch plane. For example, here I have two lines. I'll left-click the line on the left and select the horizontal constraint from the toolbar, and you can see the line is now horizontally constrained. Now let's make the line on the right vertical. Again, I'll left-click the line, then select the vertical constraint from the toolbar. You can also make 2 points either horizontal or vertical by left-clicking each point, then selecting the constraint from the toolbar. The keyboard shortcut for horizontal is H, and the keyboard shortcut for vertical is V. One last thing to mention about the horizontal and vertical constraints. They are easily created automatically as you're sketching using inferencing. So just keep an eye out for the horizontal or vertical constraint icons as you're sketching, and you won't have to add many of these constraints manually. Finally, let's discuss the equal constraint. If you need to make multiple pieces of sketch geometry equal in size, the equal constraint is what you need. For example, here I have 2 lines, and I want them to be the same length. Simply left-click each line, then select the equal constraint from the toolbar. You can also use the E key on your keyboard. Another example would be if you want to make multiple circles the same diameter. Simply left-click each one, then select the equal constraint from the toolbar. Now if the diameter of one circle is changed, they all change.
All right, and we'll finish off this section watch these next two videos.
Let's discuss a few of the common constraints you'll need to work in Onshape. Here we'll be discussing the concentric constraint, the tangent, perpendicular, and parallel constraints, as well as the midpoint constraint. Let's start with the concentric constraint. The concentric constraint is a great way to ensure two or more arcs or circles share the same center point. For example, here I have two circles, and I want to locate one circle inside of another. Simply left-click each circle, then click the concentric command from the toolbar. The same applies for two arcs. Another useful example of concentric is making a point concentric with a circle or arc. To do this, simply left-click the point, left-click the circle or arc, and select concentric from the toolbar. You can see the point I selected is now constrained to the center of the circle. Next up, let's discuss the tangent constraint. As the name implies, the tangent constraint makes two pieces of sketch geometry tangent. For example, I want a tangent transition between the line and the circle. Simply left-click the line, then the circle, then select the tangent command from the toolbar. You can also use the T key on your keyboard for tangent. Another example would be two arcs or circles. Simply select each arc or circle and select tangent from the toolbar. Finally, you can also make an arc or circle tangent with a plane. Here I'll click the right plane, then my circle, and then make them tangent. Next up is the parallel and perpendicular constraints. To make two or more lines parallel, left-click each line and select parallel from the toolbar. To make two lines perpendicular, left-click each line and choose perpendicular from the toolbar. Finally, the midpoint constraint makes it easy to constrain your sketch geometry to the midpoint of a line or arc. Simply left-click your point, then the line or arc, and choose the midpoint constraint from the toolbar.
So the first one you put press top.
Yes, it seems like the first object you choose is the dominant one, and then the second one you choose snaps to whatever constraint you're choosing.
And you will automatically get an angle dimension.
Whoops.
Finally, if you need to edit a dimension, now that we've discussed creating sketch geometry and constraining it, it's time to talk about adding dimensions to our sketch. There are two ways to add dimensions to your sketch. The first is to add dimensions as you're sketching. The second is to sketch your geometry, then come back and add dimensions later. To add dimensions as you're sketching, simply type in a number and hit Enter immediately after sketching your geometry. So for example, here I'm sketching a line, and immediately after I finish placing the line, I type in a dimension and hit Enter, and you can see the dimension for the length of the line has been added. This applies to nearly all sketch tools like circles, rectangles, arcs, and more. If defining your geometry requires two dimensions like it does in this rectangle, you will start by entering the horizontal dimension, then hitting Enter. Then it will automatically take you to the vertical dimension, type that in, and hit Enter. The second technique for adding dimensions is adding them after you've finished sketching that geometry. To do this, select the Dimension command from the toolbar, then left-click on the entity or entities that you want to dimension. Finally, move your cursor to where you want to place the dimension and left-click one final time. Then enter the value you want for your dimension and hit Enter. Notice that your sketch will scale to match that first dimension. If you're a fan of keyboard shortcuts, the D key on the keyboard can also be used to select the Dimension command. The process is the same regardless of the sketch geometry that you want to dimension. For instance, to dimension the distance between 2 points, simply select the Dimension command from the toolbar and left-click each point. Then move the dimension to where you want to place it and left-click, then just type in a value and hit Enter. Another example would be to dimension the inside or outside of an arc or circle. In Onshape, you simply select that part of the arc or circle for your dimension, and Onshape automatically adds the dimension from the correct location. Another example would be angle dimensions. Simply select two lines that are not parallel and you will automatically get an angle dimension. Finally, if you need to edit a dimension, you can double-click the dimension in the graphics, enter a new value, and hit enter. If you want to delete a dimension, simply select the dimension from the graphics and hit the delete key on the keyboard.
All right, I really like that feature in this drawing software, the dimension stuff. So we have 25 minutes, looks like. We're going to try to do this next sketch, which will be our first sketching review. So completing a sketch, you'll want to, on your tab with the instructions, so you want to switch over and follow along with me. So we're going to go to completing a sketch. Now this has, oh no, we've already done this. Let's do exercise basic sketching. So we're going to try to sketch this object. And don't worry, it gives you step-by-step guides. So we're going to go ahead and click on the arrow button to the next page. And the instructions are found on the right-hand side. So we're going to start a new document.
Mr. Mitchell,
Yeah,
where did you go to get the very first thing? To get your new screen for your sketch?
oh, the first step. So
Yeah.
if you're in this part, we're going to hide this sketch so we don't see it anymore. So we want to click the check mark because we're done sketching. And then just scroll over the sketch and hide it. And we can add a new sketch, or you can start a new document. Let's just go ahead and start a new sketch. Then we're going to choose the top plane again.
How do you scroll over it to hide it?
So if you're inside the sketch, let's see. So this is where we were. You'll need to accept the sketch by clicking on the check mark. And then just scroll over the title sketch 1, and you should see a little eyeball. So you want to hide it. We're going to go to sketch 2. And if you don't have a specific plane chosen, you want to choose the plane. The top plane. And then we're going to right click to make sure that we're view normal to sketch plane. Except I'm a little bit orientated sideways. There we go. So it might be easier just to start with a new document. You can go back to the Onshape tab and click on Create Document. This starts it from scratch. And create a new sketch. Same process. And then choose a plane. I'm going to choose the top. And then make this normal, view normal to sketch plane. So that's the first step. So we've got a new sketch going. The next slide is you're going to make this rough sketch. Again, the dimensions don't really matter at this point because you're going to go back and change them. So you need 2 circles and then this kind of pattern of lines here. something like that. So now there's a construction line from the midpoint of this line to the center of the circle.
Mr. Vigil, how did you get the two circles to overlap?
Let me go back. So I started the second circle from the center point of the first circle.
Okay. I just used the con. Is that okay?
You use the what?
The content tool.
This one, concentric. That works too. Yeah. I don't know what that was. So you should have something looking like this, and then we're going to add construction, or no, what's it called? Yeah, construction line from the center point of this line to the center of our circle. So this is just a rough sketch of what we eventually want to have exact. So we're going to modify this with some measurements. So I'm going to go back to the instructions, go to the next step. Add the constraints needed so that your sketch is horizontally symmetric and so that all lines are horizontal or vertical. So these three lines should be equal lengths. And these two should be aligned vertically with each other. These two should be parallel, which they should be if they're aligned horizontally. And then they should be tangent to the circle. So I'm going to go in and put those. So this one should be horizontal. So I'm going to go ahead and do this. Horizontal, click this line. There, it made it perfectly horizontal. Then I need these three lines to be equal lengths. So what I'm going to do, I want to escape out of the horizontal tool and then select these three lines. 1, 2, 3. And then I want them to be equal. So I'm going to click on the equal constraint. So now they're all equal lengths. I want these two to be aligned vertically with each other. So I'm going to select these two and select the vertical. And that didn't do anything. So how do I get those two to be vertical? Oh, these two would have to be equal for those two to be vertical, aligned. So let's make these two equal. And then I need these to be tangent to the circle. So I'm going to use like these two and then go to tangent. Then select these two. Select tangent. So this smaller circle should be inside. So I need to dimension this. There it is. Well, did not help. Hmm. For some reason, this circle, let me see if I can make this one bigger. There we go. So I'm going to redimension all of these things to make it look the right way. So the next step, we'll get dimensions. So this is supposed to be 200. So I'm going to use my dimension tool, make this 200. Then we have 70 and 50 as these two dimensions, and 35 between the two circles. So 70 and 50 and 35. And this is supposed to be way over here. Let's just try that. So it's supposed to be 50. Which it actually is 50.
Errors.
Got a bunch of errors. Let's try setting this one first.
Everything's going. When did that happen?
So this line is somehow dependent on something else. Let's see what it's dependent on. Tangent. So let's release that. It should be 200.
There is so much stuff in the way. You did delete it? Oh, yeah, all the errors. Click outside of it. Like stay. Do it. You wouldn't need to do it. I just got it. want to blank on.
Why is not?
I know that that's the.
Why is that not what?
So there should be a distance between these two circles. So you want to reference those two. It's supposed to be 35. And that's broken by something.
Because you already set in the dimension.
Okay, so that should be concentric. Cannot be.
Set the dimensions for the small and big ones. Now you're trying to change it.
Should not be this hard.
I don't think you can. Mr. Visual,
Yeah.
your big and small circle already has the sizes set, so you can't change it.
Oh, good point.
I'm not quite sure what to do. Like, it won't let me edit the lengths and stuff. I'm not trying to edit the length of the lines.
Jared is probably this shape just. The cereal? Yeah.
Why does it do that? Every time?
Take 2 lines.
You did?
Go like this. Yeah. 5, 0. And
Oh.
then my circles add.
You only have 1 circle?
No, I have 2. Mine's just really tiny for some dumb reason.
Then the rest of then the rest of the dimensions then will all work out fine.
Huh?
Set in the rest of the dimensions and it will be fine.
Look, I picked them 13 and
You
then
forgot the 35.
35.
It's not 35. Oh, that's because you did the wrong side of the circle. Where do you get that?
Show
What?
constraints.
So in here,
Why does it matter what side it's on?
go to Onshape, and then you can go to Learning Center.
Michael, look, I did it right. Then
There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You go down to completing a sketch.
And then that happened.
I'm sorry that you broke it.
I didn't break it.
Great for me. Bruh.
And,
I don't. Nope. Good. Mine is happy. Mine is not. Oh, I say that. See? Oh. Oh, that's it.
Ah, it worked.
my thing didn't do it right.
Okay, so I showed all constraints. And this is where you get like all the different things that are dependent on each other. So if you try to redimension something that breaks a constraint, you'll get an error The only way to fix that is to remove the constraint that's causing the problem. And in my situation, I had predetermined a dimension, and I just had to delete that dimension. And then I could redimension it and then resize it. And the other thing I had was, what's this one called? Coincident. I had drawn my circles to be coincident instead of concentric. And for some reason that hindered me resizing the smaller one. So these are all things that I'm learning as you are learning. So the fact that we're able to do this much after one class is, I'm considering a success. We have,
You'll get there later.
Okay, never mind. I'll just get it later.
And then there was a
so once you've saved or finished a sketch, you want to press the check mark to accept the sketch. And it becomes a layer over here on the left. And you can add multiple sketches, or you can get back into a sketch to double click to get back into a sketch if you want to change something. Otherwise, if you wanted to start a new sketch within the same document, you just click the sketch button and you can create a different sketch. This is similar to what we do by creating different layers in AutoCAD. So if you want to make certain things separate from other things, you can hide them or make sure that you don't accidentally delete something that you don't want to delete. You would make a new sketch, and that way you can keep them separate. And if you're not inside a sketch, like editing the actual sketch, when you select items, you're actually selecting the sketch. If I try to delete something, it deletes the whole sketch. So I didn't want to do that. So these are just reference items for eventually making three-dimensional shapes. So even though I'm able to select items within a sketch, I'm just referencing them. I'm not actually editing the sketch. The only way to edit it would be to go back inside where you see everything has blue lines and such. And then you make your edits and then accept them here. So those are a lot of differences in this versus AutoCAD. Is you're constantly aware of the different layers that you have. And as you develop three-dimensional things, they'll appear in your parts list. So as you create three-dimensional layers, they become parts. They get listed here. So hopefully next week we'll get into making two-dimensional things three-dimensional. For today, that's all we have time-wise. So we'll continue next week.
Yay.
Yay. It's fun to be able to CAD.
Hey, are you gonna be back Monday?
Yes, I'll be back at school Monday.
Yay!
Hey.
Yay. I'm tired of being at home.
Do we have to save any, like, does this automatically save?
It automatically saves to the cloud. Yeah, you have like some sort of online storage. Saves everything there.
Okay.
Well, let's work on our Chromebooks.
Yes,
Alright, is that it?
that is it. It is now lunch.
Wait, I need you to help me with my Zoom. Because
Oh,
I need
okay.
to-
Yeah, I can stay on for that.
Thanks.
You'll want to log out of your student account and then log back in
Okay.
as administrator.
Wipe down your desk.
You're basically just going to go into the apps in the settings and find Zoom. and uninstall it.
And then reinstall it.
You'll want to actually reinstall it when you get logged back in as your student account.
Okay.
Oh, where's the mic?
It's right there in that box. Actually, just set them right here. I'll clean them off.
Thanks, Mr. Bridle.
Yeah, no problem. Did you get it uninstalled?
Oh, it's still loading. I guess computers just don't like me this year.
Yeah, you've had quite the issues.
This is my third one this year.
Yes, hopefully the last. Well, other than your new one.
Yeah. How many have come in?
I actually talked to the vendor and she said that they would be in the middle of November.
Nice.
So we've got now 2 to 3 more weeks. Hopefully before Thanksgiving.
Is the password still password for administrator?
Yes, it is.
Okay. There we go.